acknowledging the traditional owners of the lands around the country on which we are collectively meeting today. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. Next slide, please. All right, so for those who are who don't join our regular sessions, this is a bit of a context for you. So we're here today as part of IEMO's broader engagement on the IESS rule, and specifically on the settlement changes which go live on the 2nd of June next year, 2024. And this on screen is a representation of some of the key steps to note for you. We'll go through some of this in much more detail later on in the session, so I'll just touch on it very lightly now. So I suppose what's happened leading up to today, since the beginning of this year, we've had a number of dedicated sessions with stakeholders in relation to the changes that are occurring within the settlement space, to help participants understand what those changes are and start to get ready. And a number of key supporting materials have been published to assist planning and implementation. And there's more to come, which includes the provisioning of a settlement support environment, which is called out there on the slide, as well as a dedicated market trial, and much more. And we'll cover the details of this later on in the session, so I won't dwell on it in too much detail now. As well, in addition to this, we also have ongoing engagement via NEM Reform's implementation forum and through one-to-one conversations with participants. One second, I'm just going to cough. Okay, thank you. So if we can move to next slide, please. Thanks. Right, so the purpose of today is to provide you an overview of how the transition to new settlement arrangements will work for market participants. And also it's about, we want to talk to you about how IEMO intends to support you during the development and transition. And it's also an important opportunity to seek clarification from IEMO's SMEs around any questions that you have around the changes or how the transition will work. So as always with these sessions with the NEM Reform team, we aim to make it as interactive as possible. So your feedback and questions are welcome at any point during the session, either in the chat or by raising your virtual hand. And there will be breaks to verbally answer questions throughout the presentation, as well as dedicated Q&A time towards the end. And we also ask that when you do come off mute, please introduce yourself with the name and organization before you speak. All right, I think we're ready to move over to the agenda. Thank you. All right, so I've just run through the welcome with you. After this will be Chris Muffett, Manager of Wholesale Reform Delivery, will run through the context of what brings us here today. After that, Darren Gaddy, Principal Analyst within the NEM Settlements team, will talk through an overview of the changes that are happening in the settlement space as a result of the implementation of IESS. And then we'll touch on the participant support that IEMO intend to make available for you, and followed by a transition overview, and finishing with some Q&A, and as well as next steps and close. So that's sort of what we're intending to cover today. And like I said, we're intending to keep it very interactive. So happy to answer any questions or take any feedback along the way. And with that, I'd like to hand over to Chris to take us through the context of this session. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Ulrika, and just wanted to check you can hear me okay? Perfect, thank you, and welcome everyone. It looks like we've got a really good turnout on the Teams call today, so Good afternoon to everyone. So for those of you who don't know me, my name's Chris Muffett. I manage the wholesale reform delivery within AEMO, and along with Luke Barlow, we are effectively the joint sponsors and reform owners of implementing the integrated energy storage systems for AEMO and for the industry. I've just got a couple of slides just to give you a little bit of background for those who aren't familiar with what the IESS reform is about. This slide provides a bit of a timeline of where we're up to, and for those of you familiar with it, I'm sure you'll appreciate that IESS has been a bit of a journey. It actually involves a number of discrete deliverables. We have already to date implemented changes which enable SGAs, small generation aggregators, to participate in FCAS. That was earlier this year. And then back in August, we also enabled aggregate dispatch conformance for hybrid facilities to be able to provide more flexibility and firming of their output. And then we've got two major milestones that are happening next year. On the 2nd of June 2024, we go live with some significant changes around the settlement systems and in particular changes to the way we manage cost recovery for non-energy services, things like ancillary services. And then on the 3rd of June, we also go live with our bidirectional unit bidding and dispatch, and we'll sort of talk a little bit about what's involved there. The primary focus of the session today will be around the 2nd of June 2024 change and the settlement and the non-energy cost recovery changes. On this slide, there's also some links to some additional information, such as the rule change and information that's on AEMO's website. We'll just jump to the next slide. Next, Leonard. So I guess a few highlights in terms of what IESS is bringing about. It's predominantly about enabling batteries to participate in the market in a more streamlined way, really through changes to the way they register, connect and participate in our market systems. The introduction of the new integrated resource provider will allow providers to have a single category of registration rather than what we currently have with the customer and generator criteria. Batteries will be able to participate through a single DUID rather than separate DUIDs for charging and discharging, and it'll also enable for bidirectional facilities a single NIMI. So NIMIs won't be tied to being for customer and generator. There'll be the ability to have a single NIMI that operates across bidirectional resources. On to the next slide. Thanks, Leonard. So in terms of the settlement changes, which is really what we're here to talk about today, there's some really significant changes that are occurring. We sort of start by referring to these as being non-energy cost recovery, but the changes are actually quite a bit more significant than that. So yes, we are going to be changing the way things like ancillary services, directions and other forms of compensation will be recovered, and those changes will now focus on a gross energy rather than the netting of generation and consumption. But in addition to that, there are also some major structural changes to our systems and the way in which we publish data out through the various interfaces that we have with the industry. There's also changes to the way we manage embedded networks as a result of those non-energy cost recovery changes, which will mean that the netting or the subtractive metering arrangements that apply with embedded networks will now be done within AEMO's metering systems. So what does that mean? So the IESS rule will change the way non-energy cost recovery is done, and that initially will have some relatively small implications, but as we progressively move through into much more bidirectional energy flows, will change the way those cost recovery calculations are done. It doesn't fundamentally change the way we calculate the settlement of base energy, but it does change the data model that we use to reflect the calculation of energy. But however, it will not change the interfaces that we use from our retail systems. So if you're already subscribing to things like our RM reports to perform reconciliation of energy and NIMI level data, those metering interfaces won't be changed. We might just jump onto the last slide in this section. And this is around the IRP classification. So I won't go into a lot of detail here, but for those who are not familiar, the new IRP or Integrated Resource Provider role does have the ability to be able to classify a whole range of different types of things, generators, loads, and other bidirectional facilities. So that obviously is a key part of what this reform is doing. And the other thing to point out is that as part of the IESS changes, the current small generation aggregator role in the rules will be disappearing, and those market small generation aggregators will be transitioned over to the IRP classification. So I might just pause there. That was the end of the slides in this section, and just see if anyone has raised
There's a
any
couple of
questions.
questions in the chat for you.
Yep, I can see. So one from Christine. Currently registered battery is going to be automatically changed over to being an IRP participant, or do we need to re-register them? That's a really good question. Not something that we are intending to focus on in this session, but I sort of can give you some information there. So they're not going to be automatically changed over. What we'll be doing is we'll be engaging with. Oh, sorry, I'll keep going. So there will be a progressive plan to migrate the existing batteries over to the IRP, but it will be done in consultation and in a timing that's coordinated with the battery operator. So it's not an automatic changeover on the implementation date. It's more a coordinated changeover because it will involve changes to things like DUIDs and bidding. So that is something that will be coordinated on a battery by battery basis and not an automatic changeover. Hope that answers your question, Christine.
I might just add, sorry, Chris, I might
sure.
just add there on that topic as well that we do have a dedicated stakeholder session next week on the 12th, specifically for batteries that will be affected by that transition and cutover process. So I might just put this as a standing invitation to join that group.
Yeah, and maybe if there's some details on our website, maybe just post the link into the chat, and that will help as well.
Yep.
Thanks, Ulrika. And the next question was from Deepak. Will it be allocated a new NIMI for a dual NIMI configuration, or one of the NIMI that will be made extinct? So look, I think I'm not sure we've necessarily come to a landing as to whether we will reuse one of the existing NIMIs. I think my understanding is that our preference at the moment is to reuse one of the NIMIs, but I don't know whether that has been locked in or formalised as yet. I would expect that that'll also be covered in the session next week on IRPs. So I think it's probably an area that's still open for discussion. The next question, apologies if already covered, but does this just apply to scheduled assets, or could it apply to batteries under unscheduled VPP? So if we're talking about batteries that are formally registered with AEMO, then it will apply to them. But obviously, if there are batteries that are not individually registered, so they're not registered in their own as an individual facility, then it wouldn't apply. So batteries, for instance, that are participating through VPPs would not be covered through these arrangements. Next question. Is it fair to think of NECR as being the summation of generator costs and load costs, where a BDU will be acting as a generator load for an interval? So not sure exactly what that means, but certainly the way the rules are intended to work is, whereas previously we have the concept of AGE, or the adjusted gross energy, which represents a net of generation and customer energy, that is now being replaced by two new concepts, the adjusted consumption energy and sent out energy, and depending on whether the particular recovery involves a calculation based on consumption or sent out, it will then use each of those individually. We'll get into a bit more detail on that in the slides to come. Thanks, Rowan. And I think Ulrika's put some more information in, which is good. And we've got a hand up, I think. Gagan, I can pass over to you.
Thanks, Chris. Gagan here from Energy Australia. Hope you can hear me okay. Yep,
loud and clear.
Okay, perfect. Chris, just a quick question, just a follow-up from the earlier question asked about the IRP registration. I think some of that might get covered next week, but,
yes.
But just a quick one in terms of if and maybe I can wait for the answer next week, but if you can now, if a participant wishes to use the transition period and does not want to start to the consolidated BDU model from the 3rd or 4th June date, can the participant still participate in the market trial testing?
I don't know the specific answer to that. Certainly, from my perspective, if we're talking about a market trial or a non-production, then I wouldn't have thought the time which they transition would have any impact on how they choose to participate through a non-production environment. But
Sure.
Perhaps that would be the best asked at the forum next week.
No worries, will do. Thanks, Chris.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone for your questions. We might obviously we've got a lot more technical content to go through. So if it's okay, we might sort of get into the technical content, and we can pick up further questions as we go. So happy to hand over to Darren.
Thanks, Chris. We do have another one in the comments already from Deepak about dual MLFs. And that is another one that will require some change post IESS. Some batteries have very specific situations at the moment where we can't necessarily use the dual MLF functionality as it was originally designed. So we're changing that functionality a bit with the IESS release. So overall, the impact of the functionality will remain the same. It's just how AEMO has to utilize the systems as we change over to the single DUID model that will need some change from our end. But generally, that won't be visible to participants, I think. All right, can we move to the next slide, Leonard? This is just the contents. So a lot of this information has been discussed in our previous forums. There's a little bit of new stuff which I'll be focusing in this meeting. But if anyone's got any questions on the slides I'm kind of going through quite quick, please just jump in and let us know. Next slide. This is the slide that describes the data structure before and after IESS. So currently we have our reads come in and they get settled in 3 separate settlement tables and then aggregated together into a customer and generator billing table. So that then disappears with IESS because we're going to settle everything in a single table that we're referring to as the energy transactions table. The bottom section in yellow kind of highlights some of the other changes where the participant type changes for IRP for both the SGAs and the batteries, and we've got some new classes for the different aspects of the market as well. So all that stuff has to be updated during the transition as well to make sure MSATs is in line with how we're registering the batteries going forward. We might go to the next one, Bernard. This is a lot more detail about what's in that new energy transactions table. So this is now fairly locked in, we hope, and is being reflected in the IT specs that are draft versions are out now. We might just jump to the next one, Leonard. This slide is describing how the genset detail table is going to exist in future. So the main energy transactions table, which is the top section of the diagram here, shows that we have both the generator and the battery type positions in that main table, and they're aggregated to a connection point ID level. Now, below that level and the detail that's currently in the setgen data table, you can have multiple gen sets that have the same connection point ID. They're normally represented by their own NIMI as well. So it's that lower level of detail that's going to be in the genset detail table. We've kind of extended a little bit the data that's in that genset detail table, so that should be more useful to participants going forward. This example I've sort of extended at the end of the pack now as well to show, you know, how these things work in amongst the transition process as well. So we'll come back to this example a bit later. We'll go to the next one, Leonard. Someone's saying we missed slide 15. I don't know what was on slide 15. Do you just want to go back a couple? Yeah, 15 is the important one. This has actually had some change since the last time we presented this pack. So previously we only knew what our internal database tables were named, which is why we had things like settlements.energy_transactions as the table name. Now the data model table names have been defined, so that's what participants will actually see in the data model going forward is set_energy_transactions. There used to be a couple of extra tables shown in this slide as well, but I recently worked out that those tables aren't actually available in the data model. So they've been removed now. They're just sort of tables used in the internal AMO calculation process. All right, we can skip forward again, Leonard. Yeah, we'll jump through to the next one. This is a fairly basic example that shows what's sort of been discussed before under IESS, both how it's defined in the rules and how we need to perform the calculation in our system. It doesn't matter how you do that calculation, you know, the end output of the amount being charged or received is going to be the same. It's just the way the steps in the calculation are broken down is changed with IESS for energy particularly. There's a question from Deepak in the chat. Again, I might just touch on, and he's asking whether the CE value, the consumed energy, will be equivalent to the E channel of the meter, and ASOE, the sent out energy, will be the B channel, and that is correct, although the data that's stored in CE and ASOE in our settlement systems is the DLF adjusted values of those meter readings. So if you're distribution connected and you've got a a DLF on that NIMI, then yeah, it won't, ASOE won't be your B channel exactly, it'll be your B channel multiplied by your DLF. Can we go to the next one, Leonard? This is where we talk about the non-energy cost recovery. I don't think this slide's changed at all. Basically, as Chris discussed earlier, currently most of the calculations are based on a net energy number from, you know, either the customer data or the generator data. Going forward, you know, we no longer treat customer and generators separately. The simple fact is, if you're consuming energy and you've got an ACE value, then you will be recovered from for the group of non-energy costs that are at the top. And regulation services remain pretty much the same, with the MPF calculation not changing at this point. And the residual just moves to being recovered from ACE. The latest question, yes, we are recording this. I've seen that has started. Unaccounted for energy is mentioned at the bottom of this slide. That's something we corrected during the last session. So unaccounted for energy moves to being allocated to all participants based on the DME. So that's the distribution connected consumed energy value. That's what means that generators can have an impact from UFE going forward if they've got auxiliary load in a period and that generator is connected to the distribution network, then they will get a small share of the UFE in that particular area. Next slide, please, Leonard. This is the changes to the embedded network management. I won't go through this example in as much detail. I think that's something we went through in the last session. You know, to ensure that the net figures, to ensure that the gross figures going forward are as accurate as possible, we had to change the way we perform the calculations for the embedded network parents. So currently, all those calculations take place in the settlement system. And we can do that because it just, the net number that comes out of that is fine. But in future, we need to make sure that the gross numbers are fine. So that's how this example shows in the sort of pinky highlighted numbers that the imports and exports are slightly different in this new method, where the net number is still the same. We'll just catching the question about UFE being applied for distribution connected generators only. That's correct, but it's actually more generic than that. So UFE only is applied to anybody that's distribution connected. So if you're a transmission connected customer, you also don't get UFE assigned to you currently or in the future. UFE is entirely a distribution network consideration. So it's only those generators that are embedded in the distribution network that will have a UFE allocation under IESS. We might go to the next one, Leonard. I don't know if there's actually any more for me. Oh no, there are. This is the new slides in this pack. So there are some changes coming in the settlement report with the IESS release. Some of them are required for IESS, and others are just some cleanup that we're taking advantage of the release to do at the same time. So anywhere that currently the recovery amounts refer to customer or generator, those sort of sections are getting updated by the ACE and ASOE type recovery amounts. How we present the energy part of the statement also needs to change, of course. One of the other minor changes is just to remove an unused column in the frequency the FCAS payment section. And then if you go to the next slide, Leonard, there's a more major change that we're planning to make on the direction section of the SR. So this section currently ends up very, very long now that we're having quite a lot of directions quite often, and I've always found it very hard to understand. So we've tried to make it a bit clearer. So going forward after the IESS release, we'll have just 2 sections in this part of the SR. The top section will be all participant specific information. So it'll include all the amounts that you're paying for in the recovery and any amounts that you're paid for each direction. And all of the directions, doesn't matter what the status of the direction is, they'll all be in one section. So you'll see the direction IDs in nice numerical order. And then the second section will be the more general information. So the description of each direction, what the service is that direction was for, the start and end periods, and the total recovery amount that your share was calculated from. I think the other point I made on the early slide was that currently we're not expecting any change in the PDF statements. So IESS doesn't require us to change anything in the PDFs. You know, there is potential that something else might need to change, and that change will come through in this release as well. But nothing at the moment is planned for the PDF statements. All right, if I go back to the questions. Do we make these meeting recordings available, Rika? I can't remember.
That's the intent, yes. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Then that's fine. Does this mean generators will receive 2 statements? No, everything will still be a single statement. It's just that, yeah, the look of the statement will change slightly. You know, and still your overall energy payment, if you're a generator, you know, at the end level in the statement will still be your net energy payment, your, you know, the generation you've been paid for and the consumption that you had to pay for. But it's just how it's presented will change slightly. Changes to the SR direction section. Is it possible to include the state? We don't have the state at the moment. That's something we can take on board and ask our developers to include. I'll just write that down so I don't forget. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to mention with directions is the service value, which is, so if it's an energy direction, the service is also listed as energy. And if it's an FCAS direction, the service is the FCAS type kind of thing. So it will say, you know, raise 5 minute if it was a direction for raise 5 minutes. Currently, that information is only available in the SR, but with the IESS release, we're also adding that direction service field into the data model and into some of the other reports that are published for the directions. That was a shortcoming that we've only, you know, recently had highlighted when we've had more of these FCAS type directions. Okay. State is in the direction section at the moment. Yeah, I thought we tried to be careful not to drop anything too important, but we'll have to check up what's happened with the state in the SR. There's a question about embedded network changes. The only file changing is the RM16. Yeah, I lose track of which one's which, but if the slide says it's the RM16 that's changing, that's the only one that is impacted by that particular change, I believe. And the last question there for the cutover of the data tables, will AEMO start completely empty or will AEMO populate historic data? No, so they will be entirely empty, and the new tables will only be populated from the 2 June start date of the new settlement functionality in IESS. So there will not be any earlier dates in those new tables. It's not easily able to be completed to sort of backfill the new tables with the existing data. All right, if we don't have any more questions, I think I get to hand back to Chris now.
Great, thanks, thanks, Darren, and thanks for everyone's questions. Look like we might have one more question. How will the invoice revision process work to apply for periods prior to conversion? Darren, did you want to tackle that now, or cover that
I can
under
tackle that now. So all the revisions for periods prior to the IESS start date will continue to populate the old tables using the same settlement methodology as we're using now. So the revisions effectively are calculated under the old method, and the new statements will be calculated under the new method. So there is that sort of hard sort of cut over on 2 June, where for dates prior to 2 June, we use the old method. For dates on 2 June and forward, we use the new method.
Yeah, and the key thing to note here is that for those periods prior to 2 June, there's no changes to any of the reports or data. So your systems will continue to work exactly the same as they do for those periods prior. It's just obviously for periods after that you need to be aware of the changes. All right, we've got some more questions. Any changes to tables related to SAPs to make alignment with IESS calculation? I don't know the answer to that one, Darren.
The answer is no, I believe. I don't think SAPs is touched at all with IESS going live.
Yeah, that sounds reasonable to me. So that's good. And will the changeover happen at the beginning of the settlement period?
By settlement period, maybe you're referring to a billing week there. So yeah, the changeover date was changed for the settlement side of things. That's why we've got a 2 June start date, because that's the Sunday of that week, and then some of the other changes in the rules still refer to 3 June because they're not important for settlement side of things. Yeah, we requested that as a rule change because it makes it a lot easier for us to implement if it's the full billing week that gets cut over, kind of thing.
And I guess the other thing to note there is that the changes will apply from the first trading interval on the 2nd of June, being the midnight to 12:05 trading interval, rather than the 4 a.m. which some people think of as the first interval for trading purposes. So it's the midnight boundary on the Sunday morning.
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. Excellent. Well, I think we've got through all of the questions, so we'll just quickly cover off the participant support section. So we just jump to the next slide. Thanks, Leonard. So there's a number of ways which we are providing information and support with regards to these changes. Obviously, engagement through various forums and workshops, including this forum, forums such as the EWCF, as well as one-on-one discussions, and certainly if your businesses are keen to go through a one-on-one discussion, if there's particular areas of interest or concern you wanted to explore, certainly reach out to us. In addition to that, we've obviously got technical documentation that's being produced, and the next couple of slides will go through some details there. We're also providing information around the transition and the test and go live plans through things such as the implementation forum. We've got we're currently proposing to produce information under what we call the Settlement Participant Support Environment from the 15th of December onwards. We're still working through exactly what the details of that will look like, but what we're expecting that to be is effectively a mock-up of the information that you would receive under the new arrangements in a form that you would typically receive, things like the SR report and other data model reports in an environment, a non-production environment that you'll be able to access, and that'll obviously involve a mixture of confidential as well as public data. So we're currently working through the detail of how that will be delivered to you. And then obviously the market trial in our pre-production environment between April and May next year. We might just quickly touch on the next slide. So I won't go into a lot of detail on this. This is just an extract of the high-level milestones for the IESS June release, and on there you'll see that there's a number of milestones that relate to publication of key pieces of documentation, and these milestones are primarily tracked through the Participant Consultative Forum as well as the Implementation Forum. And just on the next slide, we've got a number of links to useful information, guides, some of our industry readiness and go live material, and also links to where the technical documentation is being published. So certainly feel free to utilise all of that information. As well as that, we've got a resource page with a toolbox of information on IESS on our website as well. And lastly, I won't go through this slide in detail, but it just gives you an overview of all of the different engagement channels that we have with regards to the NEM reform program, all the way from the executive forum down to the individual working groups and other information groups. So if your business is not already engaged through that, feel free to reach out to us through the NEM reform mailbox, and we can get you invited to those. So I want to see if we've got. Okay, so we've got one question. Do we know if AEMO is on track to meet project release timeline, or there could still be the possibility to push back the go live date? So I'm happy to report at the moment that that we are progressing well against our development and internal testing. Look, I wouldn't necessarily say that everything is perfectly green and no issues. We do have a couple of areas that we are still concerned about, and will continue to engage through the Participant Consultative Forum, the Project Consultative Forum on those particular aspects. But at this stage, things are looking in good shape, and certainly from our perspective, we're not flagging or indicating a need to push back the go live date at this stage. The next question, I've noticed the EMMS technical specification has a lot more tables that are changing, which are not mentioned anywhere else before, not even in the IESS data model Excel spreadsheet. Darren, that might be a question for you. I'm not across the detail on that technical specification, but anything you can comment on there?
Yeah, we've only ever noted that a lot of other tables will be changing as well in these presentations and that particular spreadsheet that's being mentioned. So most of those changes are the additional of extra fields to reflect the new recovery methods a lot of the time. So again, if we've got something that's got a customer and generation recovery field in that table, we now need to have an ACE, an ASOE segregation of those recovery amounts. So yeah, we've kind of focused a lot in these sessions, and when we were requested to put that mapping spreadsheet together, the request was focused on the new tables as well. So that's why that was delivered first. I kind of had hoped to try and extend it a bit further, but it is quite time stretched here at the moment. So yeah, the tech spec is the comprehensive list of everything. These things, the spreadsheet and these presentations are just to provide additional detail where we're asked to provide the additional detail. In terms of it being the final list, yeah, I mean, the tech spec still is a draft at the moment, and we're still refining things and finding issues as we develop and test. So that draft can and will be updated, but the majority of change should now be captured.
I think, Darren, there's a further question from Mark about should we schedule a session just to go through these table changes. Did you have a view on that, or is that something that we should take on notice and consider?
I'm not really across the detail of all those changes, so I'm not sure how valuable that session would be. I mean, if people have got particular concerns or want to go through particular tables, yeah, we're happy to do that, but it's just something that, we might need to put something together or have people request us what they wish us to go through, kind of thing. Yeah, it's not
Mark,
it's not a small change.
Chris and Co, I think we might take Mark's question on notice, and we'll just confirm the agenda for the upcoming MSUG. And then if that, Mark, I take it you're talking at the technical level, what tables have been added, et cetera, into the data model.
That's right. I thought it might be worth just having a session to just walk through the changes, because like everything else, when you start looking at them and talking about them, someone says, "Oh, and." Yep.
So I know we have an MSUG session coming up. I think, Ulrika, if we'll just confirm what we've got on the agenda there, and then let the people know through the implementation forum and Co, if that will, to some extent, address Mark's question.
Definitely.
All right, thank you. So I think that sort of covers it for my slide. So we might move on to the next section, which is back to you, Darren, on industry transition.
Thanks, Chris. This slide is one that's been around for a while. I have updated it for this pack and hopefully made it a bit clearer. So at the top we see, the blue band is the current settlement process. This is what shows that the 2024 week 22 is the final billing week that is settled under the pre-IESS method. So you'll see 26th of June where we produce the final statement for that week, and it's all the way through to the end of next year before we produce the 30-week, the final revision statement of a pre-IESS calculation. So it's basically the end of next year before we stop using the current settlement methodology, and then we start using IESS settlement process from week 23. So the first prelim will be issued on the 14th of June, following the go live of 2 June. There will, of course, be prudential runs that are issued to the market before that. So, from the next day kind of thing is generally the first set of data that will populate the new tables. Mark, you've got a question?
Thanks, Darren. It's probably more of a reminder for people that when you get to the end of the scheduled settlement revisions, there's still the issue that there may be something arises from a direction or so forth after that window that creates another settlement adjustment. So people should be aware that they can't totally turn off all those old tables. They may still need them available for a period after that window.
Yeah, if there happened to be a later settlement revision or a special revision kind of thing as well, we would still, we don't sort of switch anything off here. The existing settlement function will exist in the system forever. But it is something to be aware of.
It also might help if potentially there's some awareness during during that 30-week period that AMO alerts people that that may cause a revision settlement after the 30 weeks. If there's an event, just flag it to people just to keep it in their mind as we get closer to those dates, or past those dates, I should say.
Yeah. Yep. Sensible. So moving down now, you can see where the pink line shows how the current settlement tables are being populated. And this includes the transition period that's been defined now. So the intent during that transition period is to continue populating the three main settlement tables: set CP data, set gen data, and set small gen data. So for that period between 2 June and the following data model release, which is scheduled to be April 2025 at the moment, that's when we will continue to populate the existing settlement tables, even though they're not being populated in our settlements database, kind of thing. There's also a lot of dates there about when the various data models and the specs are released. That's all on track so far, I believe, and we're hitting those targets. And the settlement participant support environment shown there, and the market trial that's planned just prior to go live. All right, we might go to the next slide, Leonard. This talks about the transition approach that I've sort of mentioned already. It's important to note that other deprecated tables like set CP data region and the billing summaries of those settlement tables aren't going to be updated in the data model from the point IESS starts. The market battery reads will be entirely populated into set gen data once the current dual NIMI configuration is replaced by the single NIMI structure after they transition for each site. And there is the complexity that we've kind of touched on before, where things like EXP energy in set gen data, which is your consumption, your auxiliary load, if you're a generator, at the moment that reconciles with your DLF adjusted meter read. But if it is impacted by UFEA in the future, then that reconciliation will no longer work the same way. When we will receive the final EMS tech spec, if you just go back to the previous slide, Leonard, I think the date is on that. So the data model final spec is the 12th of March on that slide. So we've got another draft coming up shortly. All right, if we skip forward a couple. We've got another question. There's been a reference to the staging environment. This is that environment that is mentioned, and it's got a number of different names around the business at the moment. So that is the static environment we're talking about. It is new for IESS. It's still to be confirmed what we're going to do with that static environment. We're sort of getting into the detail of that now, so we will hopefully have more detail on that shortly for you. As we mentioned earlier, there has been a mapping Excel file provided. We sent that out maybe a few weeks ago with notification via settlement communications and stuff. So hopefully people are aware of that on the website now. I did update it recently just to fix a few minor problems. So there's a version on the website with a slightly later date on it that's available now. So this includes a mapping of how the new tables are being used to populate the 3 settlement tables during the transition period. There is not always a direct mapping of the old fields to the new fields. Some fields are sort of just too different to be able to be directly mapped to the old data. There can be sign issues, and the sign conventions in the current table are quite confusing. So we do need to be very careful with how we manage that. So again, if the sign in the new table is negative, but the current table has a positive value, we will be matching that positive value as we create the report to keep populating the current settlement tables. In the past, we've said we wouldn't calculate some of the fields that are a bit strange, like the CPRRP field that exists currently. So that's just the price times TLF. But the developers have decided they're happy to calculate those fields. So we are going to be populating most of the fields during the transition. Previously, I'd suggested those calculations wouldn't be done, but it was easy enough for the developers to do. So that is now being planned to be implemented. Just looking at the latest questions. Would it be helpful to the participants if the extra tables in EMS spec are also added to the mapping sheet? Yeah, I guess it's up to participants to tell me if that would be useful. It's certainly something I've considered doing, but not found the time to do yet. So if everything in that, if that mapping spreadsheet is useful to people, and I can consider adding an extra tab that tries to show all the new fields that are being added to existing tables. It's somewhat complicated for me because the data model varies a fair bit from the settlements database. And so I've got to be careful in making sure that we provide the picture to participants that is the data model view, not the settlements database view. But yeah, seems like that's getting some support, so I will try and do that over the next week or so. Maybe a bit longer. I won't lock myself into a date on that yet. For the modified tables mentioned, existing name of columns going to stay the same. Yeah, so for the extra tables, my understanding is that the existing fields all stay the same, and it's just new fields that are being added to those tables. And so basically, if you're getting data for an IESS settlement date, then the new fields will be populated. And if you're getting data for a pre-IESS date, it'll be the old fields that are populated. And are we expecting the full data model to be released anytime soon? Again, there is a date on that earlier slide that shows when the data model is available. And I believe the plan is for, draft versions of that data model to be released in time for this extra database, the environment that's being discussed, so that yes, you would have access to the draft version of the data model at that time. The production release is quite close to the go live of IESS, if I remember the date from that slide.
Yeah, Darren, it's Craig again. Yeah, that's right. So the current plan is that data model release gets released into that participant development support environment. There'd then be another version available, obviously, as we go into, hopefully the same, as we go into the market trial, with the production version released ahead of the go live date.
Yep, yeah, that aligns with what I've heard recently. All right, can we go to the next slide, please, Leonard? This slide just talks about the impacts of this transition approach. We have discussed these before. So, the intent is to allow participants to rely on the existing tables for a little bit longer, should they need to. You've still got the option of of installing the new data model and having the new tables available to you as well as these old tables. So the data should align. Some of the trouble we have is that the data being populated in your data models to set CP, set gen, and set small gen, that data won't be available to us at AEMO. So if you do have any issues or questions around that data, it'll be much more difficult for us to support that type of question. And yeah, some of the way data is presented in things like the settlement report, the SR text file, it may not align perfectly with how the data is showing up in the legacy tables. There's another question, and yeah, that was what I said. For the new fields that are added to modified tables, they'll only be populated for dates that are calculated under the IESS methodology. Question from Alan: in the pre-prod and staging databases, will the cutover date be earlier to test the new calculations? Yes, yeah, Alan, that is the intent. Not so clear what will be happening in the staging database yet, but for pre-prod and certainly our UAT, the way we need to test is to pick a backdated date. We also, we need to have metadata available in the environment. So we take a copy of our settlement database, and then a few weeks later, we'll take a copy of the retail environment so that they've got, real data that they can then send us in a way that matches how that data would be sent with production. So that limits how long that testing period can be. It might only be 3 weeks. We haven't chosen an exact date yet. I think we might have for market trial, but I can't remember what it is. It will be a date that's relatively soon, I think. And so the intention will be that we, within that sort of 3-week testing window we've got, we will transition a number of batteries to the new data format. We'll update all the SGAs to be the new registration type. We'll do some of the other, MSATs, NIMI classification code updates. So yeah, exactly. The detail of what we're going to update will need to be worked out. Participants, those that are actively wanting to test those kind of things, we can take requests as well. I take it, Greg.
And Darren, thanks, Alan. So the general approach to that's in the market trial strategy that you will have received, or your organisation will have received. We'll also look to bulk out those dates, so including, pre-prod refresh dates, so that you can align environments, and the dates that Darren was talking about when we'll backdate to, as we put together that test plan. And that work starts with our testing groups in November, just to firm that up. But we'll look to provide some indications of general dates in line with what Darren was saying over the next month or so in the implementation forum for you.
Yeah, I think the dates we have confirmed, I was thinking about, are actually our UAT planned dates. I might be getting ahead of myself a bit.
No, that's fine, Darren. Yeah,
we're getting close to UAT, but yeah, the market trial is still a bit further away. All right, Leonard, we might go to the next slide. All right, so these are now moving into examples of how the transition report logic will be developed. It's kind of similar to the earlier example I talked about briefly, and you see the battery and generator type records are at the bottom of that. So the intent of the next 3 slides is to show how the data in the new set energy transactions table will be broken apart to be sent in the legacy versions of the reports during the transition period. So the first sort of table shown is how we're going to populate set small gen data for the SGA data. So that will be where, you know, the same logic as current, where the participant ID ends in SGA, but we're also going to restrict it to being where the meter type is NREG. And that data will then be populated into set small gen data. You can see the orange highlights are where we have to change the sign of the data from the new table to match the positive values that are in set small gen data currently. This could result in a slight difference than currently. Currently, it doesn't matter what your meter type is. Anything that ends in SGA as a participant ID gets separated out into the set small gen data table. Generally, they've only got the NREG sites, but once these participants get re-registered as an IRP, in theory, they can start winning more generic customer type sites. So we made the decision to restrict what gets put into set small gen data to just being the NREG sites going forward. Obviously doesn't impact those of you that aren't SGAs. If we go to the next slide, Leonard. Thank you. This gets a bit busy looking. Sorry, the set CP data table is quite long, which is why it's sort of broken up across 2 sections at the bottom of the slide. So the next set of sites that get cut out to be populated as set CP data will be anything else that's got an aggregated read, and just excluding those SGA sites that we've put in the other table. So again, in this case, we need to change the signs of a few fields. There, as mentioned earlier, some of the calculated fields that I'd earlier said weren't going to get included are now being populated in the legacy reports. So things like the CPRRP and the AFE field, which is, you know, the current non-UFE adjusted energy value. So that's going to be calculated by CE megawatt hours plus ASOE megawatt hours, which are the 2 non-UFE adjusted field values at the moment. All the stuff shown in grey in set CP data are fields that aren't really used actively at the moment. They will be populated the same way as they are currently, so they'll have a 0 or a null, or the MDA one just has MSATs in it currently, so that convention will be continued. Deepak's asked a question. The meter type field is mapped to the participant field of the connection point ID. Meter type is driven by the NIMI classification flag in MSATs. This is one of the bigger changes that we're making with IESS, to include more of these classifications. So things like if you're large or small or wholesale, you'll get mapped to a meter type of customer because they're all treated the same way in our system. We had to create new meter types for things like NREG and BDU for the fee calculations mainly, and to allow this kind of transition methodology to work. So fees post IESS are to be calculated exactly the same way we do now, and that makes things a bit complicated because we no longer have the separate tables where, you know, all your customer type reads are in one table and your generator read type are in another table. So that's what this meter type field is for. Is there a document that sets out the calculations? No, there's not. Well, there is, it's just not publicly available. So there is a mapping table, and yeah, I can probably add that to that existing mapping file as another tab. I just got to consider that a little bit further, but yeah, that would be my intention to add that as well. It's a pretty basic mapping, I think, but there is it does consider a mapping provided from our metering system as well. So I've just got to make sure that all makes sense for participants that maybe don't have the view of what all our systems are doing. All right, Leonard, can we go to the next slide? And this is the final. Sorry, Mark, did you have a question?
Yeah, sorry, Darren. This mapping table that you're doing, is this intended to be a one-off for this IESS change, or it sounds to me like it's something that now needs to form part of the EMS technical documentation suite of documents and be maintained long term, given that some of the things that you've been discussing are like basic information that people would need going forward.
Yeah, potentially, Mark, and just raised the thing to me is that I did, in theory, that it's a mapping table that's in EMMS. It's actually a table we have to update, so it could actually be in the data model already. I don't think it is, but I always have to check because I'm not that close to the data model generally. But yeah, it does. This mapping takes on a bigger role. In the past, it was just what drove whether the sites were put into set CP data or set gen data or the small gen data kind of thing. So yeah, that's something we'll take on board and consider a bit further.
I think it would be it's from everything I'm hearing, it sounds like it'd be a valuable long-term tool and worth the investment. And since you've already built it.
Yeah. I mean, it's just an existing table in the database. It's just, we're using it a bit differently now. And just need to think about the best way to provide. Obviously,
well, even this extra information about the meter types and so on, it all sounds like it's very valuable.
Yep, fair enough. A question from Ramya is the market fee process is not changing. The way we are calculating and applying fees is not changing. So the fee cycle is a 5-year or 6-year, one of those anyway, cycle. So basically, I think we've still got a year and a bit of the current fee schedule. It's not far away from, I think, beginning its consultation process for the following 5-year fee schedule. So yeah, how you're charged fees currently will continue post IESS.
Yeah, the fee structure is currently set at a 5-year. So the last fee determination was effective from July 2021 and runs out June 2026. So AEMO probably in, I'd imagine, 2025 will embark on a consultation on the new fee structure to take effect from July 2026 onwards.
Deepak, I'm not sure I understand your question fully there. Total megawatt hour in the new table is just the sum of ACE and ASOE megawatt hours. Need to be careful with the current set gen data table as sort of shown in this table. Net energy is actually the same as G energy. It's an old convention, that net field, so it's just got the same. So there is no total megawatt hours in the current set gen data table. You actually have to add your EXP energy to G energy to get the total currently. So I'm not sure if that's answered your question, but maybe come off mute and ask if you've got anything further.
So Darren, it's Deepak from Energy Australia. So I'm still not clear. So total I understand is the sum of ACE and ASOE, but if someone asks me what is actually total megawatt hours, do we call it as a net energy, which is like
it's the net value basically. We try and avoid mentioning net because so many people talk about nets in so many different ways. Coming up with these field names was, not straightforward, and we've tried to make it as clear as possible and stay away from some of the conventions in the past that made things confusing. But it's always difficult to try and make something that's understandable by everyone on first look. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
No worries. Ruth, but if the battery in the first line has a secondary TLF, where does that get captured? This table, or these tables currently and future, they show the TLF that's been applied. So if the primary TLF of this battery is 0.95 and the secondary TLF is 0.98, then because this table has 0.98 in it, you know that the secondary TLF has been applied in this case. We don't store both TLF values in these tables and then, show you which one's been applied. It has to be.
And I guess more specifically, the way that we apply dual MLFs is we don't apply both the primary and the secondary in the same half hour,
interval.
In the same interval. Effectively, what we would do is we would assess whether the net flow for that interval is a consumption or a sent out, and then apply the primary or the secondary depending on that.
Yes.
That's actually set out in our treatment of loss factors document on our website.
Yeah. So if the tinny as a whole is net generating, then it doesn't matter that some of your battery is consuming. You still get the generator type TLF applied to both your consumption and generation. Yeah. It's sort of background standing data has the primary and secondary TLFs in it. These tables just show you what gets applied.
Darren, it's Mark.
Yep.
Quick question or quick request, because I'm not across the EMMS documentation, but is there a note or something in the documentation that refers you to the other document about how the TLF and MLFs are applied? Because just that simple explanation was interesting, but I thought, wonder how many other people don't understand it and wouldn't know where to find the cross-reference.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know how to find it, to be honest, Mark.
Well, there we go.
Sure somebody. Oh, there you go. Chris has populated.
Yeah,
in the chat.
what I'm saying is I think in the EMS documentation, when someone's looking at how the settlements tables are built, that there needs to be a note in that to refer you on. Thank you, Chris, for that.
Oh, the only reason why I know that is because I wrote that section when we implemented dual MLFs in, I think it was 2009. Yes.
You've got a good memory.
Sorry, I've been around too long.
Well, that's one of the reasons that's, I think things like this are good to be captured in the documentation.
Yep.
Because
agreed.
if you hadn't been in the room, we might not have had a good answer.
Yep, agreed.
All right, I think that's my last slide, unless anybody's got any further questions.
We might jump over to the Q&A session then, which has well and truly started. I've seen a lot of great questions, so thank you for that. It's made this a very useful session, I hope. All right, so on to some pre-submitted questions. So everyone who registered for this session had the opportunity to provide us with a question that they would like to have answered. So we've done so in writing here. So in the interest of time, I'm just going to call out a few key points here so we can talk about the next steps and close in time in about 9 minutes time. Right. So the first question really is about understanding the approach for settlement transition and provide input. That's what this session has been about. And in terms of the overall approach that we're taking to the transition, it's been discussed with participants over a number of months this year, from February to July, through the implementation forum and other NEM reform forums. And then I suppose the next step from there is the project team really welcomes feedback on what additional information you need to facilitate implementation and readiness activities. And we've had some great examples of that coming through in the chat and in discussion with you today. So thank you. Okay, so the next question, I might skip that because we're taking it on note to have a think about how we want to talk to you more about the tech specs. The next question is around changes to credentials. So we're clarifying here that yes, there are changes, and ancillary services payments and costs need to be accounted for in credential settings. And it's providing you with a link to an ongoing consultation there. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Great, thank you. And that's just supplying you with our contact details so that you can contact us for any further questions or feedback. And then the last question was around, will set gen data and set CP data continue beyond 2nd of June 2024, with data being populated into these tables for a period of time? And a description is provided there. Darren, is there anything else that you'd like to elaborate on in relation to that question?
No, I think that's fine. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Chris, for providing that further bit of information in the chat, which brings us to the next steps. And next slide, please. Okay, so we've now reached that stage where we're going to suggest some next steps and say goodbye and thank you. Basically, our recommendation is for you as a participant, if you haven't already done so, the suggestion is for you to conduct a detailed impact assessment against all areas of your operation, and that includes checking all areas affected by the removal of the setgen and setCCP settlement data tables and introduction of new tables. In addition, we've just discussed the arrangements for transition, and the ask is that you to consider if you believe any additional information is required. And we're very welcome to have a conversation with you, or for you to send through any thoughts through to the mailbox. I might pause there to see if there's any final questions or comments that anyone would like to share before we close.
Can I ask another question, please?
Go for it.
This is relating potentials. Do we know, like, if MCL review for winter 2024 based on post IESS method, or will it be based on pre-IESS method?
I'm far from an expert on credentials, Deepak, so I think we have to refer that to the credentials team. If you wouldn't mind just putting that in an email to the IESS inbox, we'll get a question answered.
Sure.
You know, I know that stuff's being considered. I know it's very complicated. Yeah, they'll be able to respond more thoroughly to you.
Yeah, because like the MCL letters will come out pretty early before IESS go live. So, and there are some impacts from the previous slide I can see. I just need to know how much would be the impact to the participants. Are we expecting that the MCLs will increase or decrease? And if they are increasing, how much would we expect to increase?
Yeah, fair enough. We'll try and get you a response on that.
Sure, thank you.
Okay, and there's a a question that's come through from Annette Domanti in the chat. So she's saying she wasn't aware of the BDU Readiness Forum. Well, we've reached out to all likely affected participants that we're aware of based on the fact that they're operating batteries and they're in the pipeline. So that includes Energy Australia. So Dan and team are definitely aware, but we've also gone out through IEMO communications newsletter, so to reach the entire industry. But happy to share any additional information that you need on this following this call. Hope that helps, Annette. Okay, I don't see any more questions. I hope that means that oh, okay, great. I appreciate the feedback that you saw this as a useful session. Definitely take that as in consideration for our future planning. And thank you for joining today. Thank you for our wonderful speakers. And I will speak to you very, very soon.
Thanks all.
Thanks
Thanks
everyone.
all.
Thank you all.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.